was not optimistic for the live-action remake of The Little Mermaid. If it had been released in 2019 or something, I would have been slightly more willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. I mean, the trailers looked adequate enough, albeit a little too similar to the original film, and there have been a couple of live-action Disney remakes that I've enjoyed, like The Jungle Book and Aladdin to a certain extent.
That's hot.
To a certain extent.
That's hot.
To a certain extent.
But after years of being worn down by more and more lazy and terrible ones like The Lion King, which felt more like a nature documentary where the narrators were accidentally given a movie script.
Yes.
Pinocchio, which was so bad I was able to make a 19-minute negative review from it, and it was still one of the more positive videos I've seen about it.
If you get splinters, I'll be there with glue.
And that awful remake of Mulan, which sucked the life and heart out of the animated version to such an extent it put me in mind of the fucking Last Airbender.
It's time for you to stop doing this!
After that, I was completely out of goodwill to give. But I was still willing to give the movie a shot. I mean, after all, even if it wasn't good, it might at least give me something interesting to talk about. But then the craziest thing happened. I actually kind of liked it. Was it good? But there were some aspects of it that I found entertaining or charming enough that I can at least say I'm glad I saw it. The movie does suffer from a lot of the problems that plagued the remakes before it though. In a lot of ways, it is still a watered down version of the original, and Ariel is a good example of that. The original Little Mermaid isn't one of my favorite Disney movies, but I still like it, and Ariel is a big reason why. She's such an expressive and sympathetic character, and you really get invested in her goals throughout the movie. It's really endearing seeing how excited and curious she is about the surface world, and the scenes where she's upset with her father or smitten with Eric feel like you're watching a real love-stricken teenage girl.
Why, Eric? Run away with you? This is all so sudden.
In the remake, you do still get some of that, but it doesn't feel as passionate. It comes off as less enthusiastic and more just going through the motions. Look at the scenes of her arguing with King Triton about going to the surface, for example.
You could have been seen by one of those barbarians, by one of those humans.
Daddy, they're not barbarians.
Do you think I want to see my youngest daughter snared by some fish-eater's hook?
I'm 16 years old. I'm not a child
Don't
anymore.
you take that tone of voice with me, young lady.
But if you would just listen.
Not another word.
This obsession with humans has to stop.
I just want to know more about them.
You know all you need to know.
If you would just try to
I
understand.
have tried to understand you long enough, but as long as you live in my ocean, you'll obey my rules.
Oh well, we tried.
Compared to the animated film, there's way less energy from the characters and the performances feel a lot more restrained. The actors play their parts fairly well, but it just feels a lot more bland. I don't necessarily blame Halle Bailey for it, she's clearly talented, and Javier Bardem has years worth of proof of his abilities. But it is just a symptom of the approach that these Disney remakes tend to take, where they're more concerned with just showing you what is objectively in the original scenes without conveying what the original scene is meant to convey, or even just being engaging in its own right. And it's not just that, there are other reasons why Ariel and Triton's conflict doesn't feel as strong. There's also an added backstory about how Ariel's mother was killed by a human, and that's part of the reason why King Triton hates them and the surface world.
They killed your mother.
One man did. Why blame every human?
I guess that could be a good way of making the drama between them more personal, but there's no context for the audience to be invested in it. There aren't any flashbacks to Ariel's mother, and we never see how much she meant to Ariel or Triton or the grief they felt from losing her. It's hard for me to take this seriously as a reason for Triton's prejudice because Ariel's mother isn't a character, and her death is barely a plot point. Ariel doesn't really show the same level of longing for Eric that she did in the original either. In the animated movie, there was a whole scene where the characters notice that she's in an unusually cheerful mood after meeting him.
Isn't it obvious, Daddy? Ariel's in love.
The remake's equivalent of the scene shows her daydreaming like before, but only for a few seconds at the beginning of the scene. The rest of the scene shows her arguing with Triton about how humans might not be as bad as he says, which isn't much different from the conversations they've been having before this.
I just mean, we're not all the same, so why should humans be?
And that makes the following scene where Triton questions Sebastian about Ariel being in love a little jarring because the through line between scenes doesn't feel as natural.
They're the most dangerous species of all, having no respect for the balance of the oceans.
You're not the only ones who have no respect for balance.
Is my little one in love?
No, wait, that's not what?
Then there are other moments that are recreated from the original, but they're not given the same context that made them work before. Like this scene where Sebastian is confronted by Triton, mistakenly thinking Triton is mad at him.
I mustn't overreact. I must remain calm.
Yes!
Yes, Your Majesty.
Now in the original, that line is pretty funny, largely because it catches you by surprise. But then in the remake...
Yes? Yes, Your Majesty.
Not only is the line delivery not as funny, but if you've seen the original film, you already know it's coming, which completely misses the point of why that joke worked. Or there's this other moment where Sebastian makes his way back to Ariel after being separated from her and says,
This has got to be, without a doubt, the single most humiliating day of my life.
In the original, he goes through this huge slapstick ordeal of getting mixed in with the laundry while being washed and later gets served on a plate for dinner. It's understandable that he would say something like that. But in the remake, all that happens is we see him climbing up a wall to reach her, and that's it.
This has got to be, without a doubt, the single most humiliating day of my life.
It's inconvenient, but I wouldn't use the word humiliating to describe it. Getting back to the characters though, this movie's version of Prince Eric is admittedly a somewhat likable character. Personality-wise, he's kind of charming and they got a good actor to play him, but I think he is another example of an arc that I don't think gets explored as well as it could. Unlike the original, Eric's dilemma is less about finding a girl to marry, although that does come up, and more about wanting to explore other parts of the world despite his family wanting to stay isolated.
Risking your life on some trade ship for the sheer adventure.
I'm trying to reach out to other cultures so we don't get left behind.
Conceptually, I actually really like this, and I think it could help to give Ariel and Eric something in common. We aren't shown any evidence that the kingdom is stagnating or any signs that significant change needs to happen. So why am I meant to get invested in Eric's goals when the movie doesn't establish what's at stake? But despite any minor changes that the movie makes, as a whole, it's basically the original film again, through and through, particularly in the first half, just not as good. And as much as I don't care for the lack of imagination on display, I'll give credit that the film at least still functions. It doesn't completely ruin any and all interesting or heartfelt moments or plot points like some of the other Disney live-action remakes, and the characters at least retain some of the charisma and sympathetic qualities that made the original a classic. But I know I said that the movie pleasantly surprised me, and don't worry, I'm not just saying that because it technically could have been worse. There are actually certain elements of this film that I like with little to no caveats, starting with the bridesmaid herself, Ursula. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting much from Melissa McCarthy in this movie. I like her as an actress, but hearing that she was going to play Ursula was sort of giving me Thor Love and Thunder vibes.
I am Hela, goddess of death!
But seeing her in the movie, she honestly pulls it off really well. She captures the same mix of eloquence and sinisterness that made the animated character so entertaining.
It's what I do. It's what I live for.
Admittedly, it's still not the most fresh take on the character they could have done, which I think at this point is just kind of a given, but I will say that Melissa McCarthy gives the best performance in this movie, and if you're going to insist on just making the animated version into live action, this is the way to do it.
I mean, I just gave you the premium package, kid.
And speaking of things that stick close to the source material, let's talk about the music. Much like most of the other Disney remakes, the soundtrack mainly consists of covers of the original animated film, with a few originals thrown in for the sake of at least appearing innovative. Some are better than others, but they all basically sound pretty decent for the most part. Halle Bailey's rendition of Part of Your World sounds really good. She manages to capture the emotion and vulnerability of Jodie Benson's performance, and I like what she does with some of the line deliveries. The song is about her wanting to go upward towards the surface, so I really like how the key of her voice rises on certain words that involve rising, like stand and above.
Ready to stand.
God, I hope key is the correct term and I at least sound like I know what I'm talking about. Overall, she does a good job with this song for the most part.
Wandering free.
I will say though that compared to the original, the scene looks a lot darker and more visually bare, and it doesn't really look like she has gadgets and gizmos aplenty or who's its and what's its galore. And this is a nitpick, but in the original there was sort of a contrast of Ariel being unhappy living in the majestic palace in the ocean and being more content surrounded by human objects, which to the audience are nothing special, but to her are the most amazing things she's ever seen. But that juxtaposition kind of gets lost in the remake when Triton's castle looks like this.
That's a rock.
Yeah, thanks, I know.
The remake's version of Under the Sea I have very mixed feelings on. Musically, it's not that different from the original, which for Sebastian was already the pinnacle of his distinguished career. So it's at least fun to listen to, and visually it's very colorful and creative with how the sea life are incorporated. But some of the lyrics don't really translate well to this new version of the scene. Like this lyric from the original.
One day when the boss get hungry,
Yes, you gonna be on the plate.
Which in the remake is interpreted like this.
One day when the boss get hungry,
Guess who gonna be on the plate?
Why does he say it like that? Like, yeah, I know, as a reference, but like, from his perspective, why does he say it like that? Has he seen the original movie too? Then there's this lyric from the original.
the knew to play the flute, the cop, play the harp, the place, play the bass, and they sound and sharp.
And in the remake, Sebastian sings those lyrics again, but there are no visuals to give it context. It's just a bunch of sea turtles marching.
they knew to play the flute, they cop, play the harp, they place, play the bass, and they sounding sharp.
And the movie makes no mention of Sebastian being a composer like in the original, so if you're not familiar with the original film, those lyrics aren't going to make any sense to you. But those are things I can mostly look past. There's one change they make that I really hate, and it's Ariel's reaction to the song.
She's into it.
Yeah, throughout the song, Ariel seems to be vibing with it, and halfway through even starts singing along.
Under the sea, hey, under the sea. Yes, child, it's like this.
The harmony sounds nice, I'll give it that, but isn't the point of the song that Ariel doesn't agree with it? Sebastian sings this song to try to convince her that the surface world sucks and that she's better off under the sea. In the original, she spends the song mostly pretty uninterested, and by the time it ends, she's gone.
Somebody's got to nail that girl's fins to the floor.
Having her sing along with Sebastian just demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of the song and Ariel as a character. Hell, in one lyric, she even starts criticizing the surface along with him.
What do they call along the side? We got the hot crustacean band. Yeah.
And then they still keep the scene's ending where Ariel just up and leaves.
Somebody got to nail that girl's fins to the floor.
Even though in this version of the song, it doesn't feel like a natural conclusion at all because she seemed to be enjoying it a second ago. Then there are the original songs, which I admit I wasn't that pessimistic about even when I expected the movie as a whole to be terrible. There have been some new songs in Disney's live action remakes that I've really enjoyed, like How Does a Moment Last Forever from Beauty and the Beast and Speechless from Aladdin. And hearing that the songs were being written by Lin-Manuel Miranda did actually sound pretty promising. There's 4 in total, so let's go over them. First of all, Eric gets a song of his own called Wild Uncharted Waters, where he sings about wanting to find Ariel after she saved him from a shipwreck.
To wild uncharted waters, miles beyond the sea.
I honestly really like this one. It's this big, passionate ballad that builds really nicely, and Jonah Hauer-King's vocals are absolutely fantastic.
Alone, just you and me, and I hope you're there.
I admit it's not strictly necessary, and emotionally it's a little shallow because Eric doesn't actually know anything about Ariel yet, but it serves its purpose fine enough, and it does sound very nice. Then there's For the First Time, which is sung by Ariel as an inner monologue after she finally makes it to the surface.
As I climb for the first time, jump for the first time.
It's a fine song, but the premise is an odd creative choice. Basically, it shows Ariel struggling to adjust to being a human and finding some things about the surface she doesn't like.
Are we only food for slaughter? Is this life on land?
Considering that living on the surface is something that Ariel wants both before and after this scene, and she never reflects on how she feels here, it's a song that just kind of feels at odds with the rest of the movie. I could understand if it was just a comedic scene of Ariel literally being out of her element, but still fascinated by the world around her, but she just seems vaguely uncomfortable throughout it. The third original song is performed by Scuttle, and it's called The Scuttlebutt, and I almost really like this one. The song involves Scuttle breaking the news to Ariel that Eric is about to propose, and this is definitely the song where Miranda's contribution is the most apparent. It's this rap number with some Latin American influence. It's upbeat and has a lot of energy, and some of the lyrics are actually really clever.
The thing with the lips when they press, I don't have lips, I have a beak, so I guess I could give you a peck on the cheek.
Really, the only issue I have with it from a songwriting perspective is that I don't think it fits in all that well with the other pre-existing songs from the original film. It just doesn't have the same kind of musical theater sound that the other songs had.
Up where they walk, up where they run.
Under the sea. Under the sea.
Come on, you unfortunate soul! Go ahead! Make your choice!
If the time is right and the time is tonight, go on and kiss the girl.
So we gotta go before the sun go down.
What? Gotta get her ready for the big showdown.
Right.
Go ahead and get her out of bed and get her ready for the wedding. Set the setting so we can't slow down.
But overall, I'd say this is a good showcase for why hiring Miranda was a good idea. But why did they have to get Awkwafina to sing it? I don't even dislike Awkwafina. I think she can be entertaining under the right circumstances, but who watched that one scene from Shang-Chi?
On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair.
And thought it would be a good idea to give her an entire song number.
You're welcome for the scuttlebutt.
I don't hate this song. I think it's enjoyable if you're able to look past the terrible vocals, but to be honest, that is kind of a big if. The last original song is Part of Your World Reprise 2, where Ariel sings in an inner monologue again about how Eric has left her for Ursula in disguise.
Where do I go with nowhere to turn to?
It's really just a few lyrics long, so there's not really much to say. I like Part of Your World, so this is fine, I guess. Moving on. Despite any criticisms I may have about the soundtrack, it is at the very least a competent recreation of the music from the original. If you like the songs from The Little Mermaid, you'll probably like these just fine. Outside of that one change to Under the Sea that I really despised, most of the differences are either harmless or genuinely good additions, and the original songs range anywhere from tolerable to great. It's like the rest of the movie. It's not as good as before, and there are some major missteps made along the way, but I'll give it a pass. But then there's the main reason why this movie ended up being better than I expected. I already talked about how Ariel and Eric aren't handled as well as the original film, but after they meet and start spending time with each other, they actually have some surprisingly decent chemistry, and they do it in ways that aren't just copy and pasted from the original. A lot of their scenes involve their arcs of wanting to see more of the world than what their families are allowing. So the first scene where they start to develop a relationship involves Ariel looking around Eric's collection of trinkets that he's picked up from exploring other parts of the world. For Ariel, a room filled with items from the surface is a gold mine, made even better by the fact that she has Eric there to actually tell her what they are, what they're for, and where he found them.
There's Venezuela, Colombia. Oh, the area up here is called Mosquito Coast.
And then that ends up going both ways as Eric shows her some objects he found from the ocean and she shows him things about it that he never knew.
Just look at this fossilized sea stone. Can you believe that such amazing things exist down there? No, wait! How did you know that was in there? It's incredible.
Not only are they finally getting what they wanted, finding out more about the world that they want to explore, but they've also both found someone else who's just as interested in it as they are. Like I said, I went into this movie with very low expectations, but then I got to this scene and I started thinking, wait a minute, this is actually kind of okay. Okay, Disney, for the love of God, please do not screw this up. You've got something good here, roll with it. And the film kinda does. The following scenes show Ariel and Eric going out and exploring the kingdom like in the original, except the things they do are actually different. It's not as good as the original movie, but it's still endearing in its own right. There's even a moment that I'd argue is actually good in a way that the original film stumbled on. It's during the movie's rendition of the song Kiss the Girl, where Eric tries to guess Ariel's name after her being unable to tell him from losing her voice.
Is it Diana? Catherine? No, definitely not Catherine.
In the original, he just makes a few guesses before Sebastian, who's hiding from him, not so subtly whispers her name in his ear.
Diana. Rachel?
Ariel. Her name is Ariel.
Ariel?
And Eric just kind of goes along with it, never really questioning where that voice came from, which is admittedly kind of a weird moment. But in the remake, they start off the scene with Eric teaching Ariel about the constellations and their names, adding that to the list of things that she's never discovered and that he's now showing her. This talk of names leads him to say,
Still don't know your name.
Ariel thinks for a moment about how to convey it, points to a constellation, and then this exchange happens.
Aries. Aries. Ariel. Ariel? Ariel. That's a beautiful name.
In the original, the way Eric finds out her name honestly feels like the writers just couldn't think of anything better. Here though, not only does the scene make more sense from a logical perspective, but Ariel and Eric are sharing their interests and Ariel uses that to create a stronger connection between the two. It's a small scene, but I think what it's doing is the embodiment of what the Disney live-action remakes should be. It isn't just an inferior copy of an existing scene, and it isn't just different due to a lack of understanding or obligation to do anything different. It's an improvement, or at the very least a change that has merit. I can't deny that a lot of the doubts I had going into this movie were justified. It is still a cynical cash grab that banks on people's nostalgia for the original film while making an inferior version of it. But saying that, I didn't hate it. Like I said, the basic plot and characters are still intact enough for you to get the general gist, and there were even a small number of moments that added some value of its own. Disney currently have plenty more live-action remakes in the works because of course they fucking do, and up until now I'd completely lost all faith in them, but I gotta be honest, for the first time in forever, I'm kinda rooting for them. It's gonna take a lot more work before they've regained my trust, but it's a start. I imagine it won't be long before that new Snow White movie gets a trailer, and regardless of how derivative it ends up looking and how skeptical I end up being, I think I'll also have a tiny speck of hope in the mix. All thanks to this movie. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see new ones before anyone else, consider supporting my Patreon. I upload previews and full releases of my videos there before they get released on YouTube. Check it out in the link in the description below. I'll talk to you later.